The big gun of the Eddy Creek fields was Shark Eye Bill Park, an old timer in the gold fields of Australia who struck it rich. He was in with a partner named Jack Nettleton, and there was this fellow, Sloane, a devout Catholic who gave an enormous nugget of gold to the Pope. These were the kingpins of the region, but the rest of the prospectors didn't have their luck. Around me were some other bizarre figures, now gone, I guess, who had prospected at the Yukon Jack London wrote about. They seemed to be part of a world migration of prospectors who will do nothing else but seek gold. A few had even fought Indians in North America, so they said, and I wondered what sort of a country America was. Others had put up with the rigors even of Siberia. They told tales of the gold fields in all parts of the world, going back 50 years. Now, New Guinea was their happy hunting ground. I was the youngest among them, but I wasn't geared to hold out. My money was running out. My Kanakas didn't like the place. They were frightened at the prospect of dying there on the high, cold air. I couldn't pay them, couldn't tell them. I realized I hadn't prepared properly to come here. I had neither the provisions, nor the money, nor the necessary men to work a claim properly. The competition with other prospectors who were better set up was too much. Get out, Flynn. Go back to the coast. Try it again later. The only thing I accomplished on that trip was a fast friendship with a respected prospector named Jack Ryan. Soon afterward, Jack was to prove his friendship for me by coming to my aid when a serious charge was brought against me. My boys and I staggered back to the sea, a shocking, frustrating experience. Gold is hard to come by, a banality if ever I coined one. Back at Salamau, looking for a new ways to prosperity, I discovered that the place had a good harbor. I could claim navigator's experience by now, and I struck up with an elderly schooner named Ed Bowen, who had a ship called the Matupi, a better boat than the Mosky. He needed a right-hand man. I was hired. We were to take a long trip up the coast to the port of Itap. You could go inland from there and reach the territory of Dutch New Guinea. Bowen said one might find gold there. You could also go into another business, shooting birds of paradise, for the beautiful feathers were then much in demand. By now, the mainland of New Guinea fascinated me as much as the sea. Aitape, where we were going, was in the Sepik River district. If you could get into the hinterland and bamboozle the natives into coming back with you to a plantation or a coastal city, you would be in the chips. They were strong fellows, good workers, and you could sell them to plantations or at ports for use in the gold fields. I was a little young, perhaps, to go in for slave trading, but it was an acknowledged way to turn a penny. Recruiting was what they called this form of slave stealing, and when you got a bunch of boys in your grasp, they were called indentured laborers. It was one of the main businesses of the rough and readies like myself who flocked into the New Guinea territory. I looked over the scene at Atape. The coastline looked glum and unexciting. There was a beach of brown sand. The natives, I noticed more than elsewhere, wore wild boar tusks through the nose. The men laced themselves up tightly with bands. They carried long black bows, and the arrows they shot were 4 or 5 feet long. I hadn't seen anything yet that looked more removed from the world of England and Australia. Only a few miles in, it was true head-hunting country, but also perhaps gold. There were certainly potential laborers, and the birds of paradise abounded. I had a few pounds, enough to equip a small jungle party. I had a few pounds, enough to equip a small jungle party. I had 4 shotguns and my own revolver. A young boy was my personal servant, or monkey, a little fellow, 12 or 13 years old, who carried my personal stuff and was in charge of anything personal I wanted to be done. Native boys loved that job and were very faithful. This particular one, Tabura, was in charge of making my tea in the morning. He carried my revolver very proudly. A revolver can weigh a lot when you're climbing up mountains. Tabura didn't mind. He carried also my personal knapsack, in which there might be some money, or wax matches kept dry in an empty quinine bottle, my razor, soap, tobacco, and also, wrapped up in watertight wax, old zigzag French cigarette papers. You rolled your own. For several days we moved steadily northward towards the Dutch border. I was a British subject, so I had no business getting over on to Dutch-owned soil, but it was in this region where the birds of paradise flourished. I discovered that the natives usually deserted their village or else attacked or ambushed when prospecting parties came through. My 4 guns and revolver should have been enough for any emergency, because you only had to contend with one village at a time. That was because the people here were all Mellup, hereditary enemies. They could never get together. You didn't have to fear a gang up. We camped outside one big kampong, or Kanaka settlement. The men I had seen about hadn't seemed too afraid. They had taken a good look at us and retreated casually. The first night I put out presents, keeping a close guard. The presents were taken. The next night I put them closer to our sleeping quarters. Calico, razor blades, some cheap knives. After the 3rd day, they started bringing presents, chiefly taro, a root that tasted like a little yam. They also brought some jungle fowl, very welcome of our meager supply of bully beef in cans. Then I found some of them squatting at the camp entrance. I invited them in. I gathered that they were the big men of the village. They were absolutely stark naked, good physical specimens, just right for the gold fields. I had no interpreters, and sign language had to do. In the distance, I saw their women beginning to peer around. That was a good sign. I rolled a cigarette. As I did, I noticed that they were making much comment. They smoked no tobacco and had no idea what I was doing. I was sitting on a large rock, getting ready to deal with them and rolling the butt. I twisted the end, put the thing in my mouth, took out a match, struck it on the stone, and lit up. A tremendous shout went up. They fled in every direction. I never could entice them back. Then, rather suddenly, we hit into a country where the birds of paradise were plentiful. Our guns began going to work on them. We made the jungle ring with a foreign sound. Crack, boom, down came the birds. The boys went and got them, brought them back to camp, cooked some on hot stones, ate them, and preserved the rest in salt. Ladies' hats throughout the world would glow and flutter like the treasures of slowly waving coral reefs in the South Seas. It's lucky for some birds that ladies' fashion change. What we didn't know was that the drums of the natives began sending the news back to the coast that someone was here illicitly, shooting their birds, rumbling the jungle, bringing the usual white man's hell into the traditional paradise. It's an amazing sight to see a flock of wild birds of paradise in these mountain depths. They swoop, a flock at a time, into one tree with their flowing tails and their colors gold and an emerald green that sparkles. The shape and design of this bird is beautiful. A small head, a slender, delicate neck, and a leaf-like blade coming down to a blaze of color into the body. Then a long orange tail that is as long as the body. They fly very gracefully, though not fast, like the flight of a heron. But the noise that comes from these creatures is raucous, dissonant. It breaks through your ears worse than the cry of a peafowl, the worst sounding of flyers. It shrills through your head so that something of the beauty of the bird is taken away. A few days later, I got word, through the jungle, that the Dutch New Guinea district officer was on my trail. I figured he had to be out about a day's march behind me. My boys and I had reached the banks of the Sepik River. There seemed no possible way to get over it. It was broad and turbulent and full of crocodiles. But knowing this fellow was not far behind, I had to think of something. I had my boys build a bamboo raft. When it was done, we put all of my birds of paradise carcasses, preserved in salt, on board. I packed everything else I owned: money, guns, binoculars, rolled tobacco, wax matches, equipment, gear. We knew we would be swept down this boiling current of river, but if we had luck, and if we paddled carefully, we might make it across to the other side, about a mile or so downstream. We shoved off and headed towards the rapids below us, and the flats just beyond that. If we got to the flats, I knew we'd make the other bank. We bounced over the rocks and plunged downstream, hanging on for life. Some of us were in the water and some out. There were jagged rocks beneath us. We went along miraculously for a time, and were getting near the flats when we ran on to a pinnacle of rocks. The crash split the raft apart. All of us went into the water, my 6 Kanakas and I, and we were rushed over boiling falls. We landed on the flats, but minus everything. All of it was washed away. Birds of paradise, feathers, plumage, salt, and all. Washed into fairly calm water. I looked around and counted heads. We were all there. We struck out for the nearest bank on the other side of the river, putting the Dutch territory behind us. Ahead of us lay the Australian-owned shore. I was swimming when I felt something I thought was a log hit my leg. Then Yulu, one of my good native boys, who had been with me from the outset, let out an awful scream. The others yelled, "Pook pook!" Crocodile. Yulu went down. I never saw him again. Next moment, I felt something smack my buttocks, scraping savagely. I was petrified, but I went into action. I had 50 yards to go. Striking out wildly, expecting to be grabbed at any minute, I made for the shore. The others did the same. All of us got in, except the one who had been seized. I was astonished that little Tabura had made shore too. I climbed out onto the ground, wet, mad, wearing nothing but a bush jacket, broke again. Not a speck of salt to my name. Until then, I had never known stark terror. Just a sense of wildness, excitement, even enjoyment of both. But when I got high and dry on the shore and realized that one of my lads was dead, and I came so close to being snapped up too, I started to shake and kept on shaking for a couple of days. We walked, with nothing to eat other than some herbs, to a Lutheran mission. Through it all, my monkey, little Tabura, stayed at my side, jabbering pidgin English and smiling. We hung about there and rested up. I got no religion, but we did get some matches, some bread, milk, and fruit, then struggled down to the coast, to Atape.